What was the greatly feared Carmine Galante like when he was in prison? Let's check it out. I'm James Gladwish and welcome to OC Shorts, bringing you detailed historical snapshots of the American Mafia and other organised crime. Feel free to subscribe if you like that sort of thing. Today, we're going to take a quick look at some stories involving Carmine Galante behind bars. Before he was blasted to death in 1979, the 69-year-old Carmine Galante had spent over a quarter of his life in prison over several stretches. Throughout the 1960s and into the early 1970s, Galante was behind bars after being convicted of heroin trafficking. And it was in Lewisburg Penitentiary in the late 1960s when New England mobster Vincent Rao became friends with the greatly feared Galante. Vincent Rao was a well-connected mafia associate who was allegedly close with Enrico Henry Tamaleo, the underboss to Mafia Boss Raymond Patriarca of the New England Mafia. In 1969, Vincent Rao had been convicted of transporting over $500,000 of stolen bonds. As one newspaper reported, a federal jury has convicted Vincent Rao, 40, of North Reading, Massachusetts, on all 4 counts of an indictment charging him with transporting $600,000 in stolen bonds to Baltimore for the purpose of cashing them. When Carmine Galante was convicted of narcotics trafficking in the early 1960s, he was allegedly serving as the underboss of the Bonanno crime family, depending on the source that you read. One such source was Jewish mobster turned informant Harold K.O. Koenigsberg. His FBI file would state, Koenigsberg does not know definitely, but believes Joe Bonanno is still the boss of his family, and has been since 1931, while Johnny Burns is underboss. Burns' predecessor was Carmine Galante, also known as Lilo, while Galante's predecessor was John Petrone, also known as John Bennett. Several persons aspired to be underboss, including Joe Notaro, but Galante outmaneuvered all of them, and it was no contest. Regardless of whether Carmine Galante held this position, or whether he was a consigliere, or actually just a powerful captain at the time of his incarceration, Carmine Galante was a man who struck fear into many mobsters. Vincent Rao spent time in Lewisburg prison with Carmine Galante. While in prison, Vincent Rao would become a government witness, and he would later publish a book in 1973, which contained several interesting stories about Carmine Galante's power while he was in prison. Let's check out a few of these stories. Vincent Rao would state that G Block inside Lewisburg Penitentiary was known as Mafia Row, and it housed a large amount of Italian-American mobsters. Teresa would state about Galante, now the capi di tutti capi of Mafia Row is Lilo, Carmine Galante. Lilo was the underboss to Joe Bananas, Joseph Bonanno, until he was jailed on a narcotics rap. He was doing 20 years. He's a stone killer. I think he took care of at least 80 hits himself. Lilo was 57 years old, but he didn't have an ounce of fat on his body. When Vincent Rao wrote his book with journalist Thomas C. Renner, Carmine Galante was still in prison. But Vincent Rao made an accurate prediction of what life would be like for the other crime families when Galante would eventually be released. Teresa stated, in or out of prison, Lilo is Mr. Big, and anyone who thinks differently doesn't know what makes the mob tick. He ought to be out of jail soon, and if he is, the New York mobs are in for real trouble. Teresa would later also state, there was no doubt in my mind that Lilo planned to take over the New York mobs when he got out. He's got the enforcers, an army of them, to make it stick. He's been off the street for years, but he's still got tremendous influence and respect. Vincent Rao would also write about what Carmine Galante thought about other mobsters, starting with Carlo Gambino. But the man he hated most was Carlo Gambino. "When I get out," he used to say bitterly, "I'll make Carlo Gambino shit in the middle of Times Square." Why he felt that way he never really explained, but he used to tremble with fury when he heard Gambino's name. Galante allegedly also gave his opinion on Joe Colombo. Teresa stated, "Joe Colombo he considered a fool. I remember one night when we were talking, he predicted that Colombo would get whacked out. Joe Colombo should have kept his mouth shut," Lilo said. "He's making too many waves. He's gonna get hit in the head, and the Gallo brothers are gonna do it, and I don't blame them. I never knew how right he was until June 1971, when Colombo was shot in New York." Vincent Teresa would expand further on how Carmine Galante ran Mafia Row. He stated, "Inside Lewisburg, Lilo was the boss. The warden ruled nothing. Lilo did. At the snap of his finger, he could have turned that prison into a battlefield. Instead, he was Mr. Law and Order. He ruled G-Block with an iron fist, and there were 150 long-term prisoners there. Jimmy Hoffa was in that block. So was Louis the Fox. Vincent Rao, the consigliere of the old Thomas Lucchese mob, was there. So was Tony Pro, Anthony Provenzano, a Genovese crime family captain, and the top executive of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, and a dozen others. On G-Block, everyone lived by Lilo's law. His most important rules were no fights, no booze, no arguments. Vincent Teresa would also tell stories about how Carmine Galante was a nightmare to play cards with, becoming abusive whether you beat him or he beat you, and how he once physically attacked a black inmate who failed to deliver his newspaper on time. Some sources have questioned the reliability of Vincent Teresa as a government witness, and therefore we can also speculate that some of the stories in his book may be embellished. But it is known that he did indeed serve time with Carmine Galante. In the comments below, let me know of any other stories you have heard regarding Carmine Galante in prison, such as his interactions in prison with John Gotti, or the time that he abused a black inmate who was ahead of him in the telephone queue. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching.